Today, we're looking at a truly fascinating piece of human history. We're going to explore exactly how our Ice Age ancestors managed to do something as simple yet completely terrifying as going to sleep.
So, let's dive right into this. How on earth did they actually survive the night? Really think about that environment for a minute. You're in a frozen world with wildly unpredictable weather. You've got no central heating, no cozy mattress to crawl into, and honestly, not even a roof over your head unless you physically build the whole thing yourself. Archaeology tells us they had to seek shelter deep in caves, tuck themselves beneath rock overhangs, or huddle inside these makeshift huts built out of wood, animal hides, and literally the bones of mammoths.
You know, for us today, going to bed is all about comfort, right? We retreat to our temperature-controlled rooms, safe under a solid roof. But back in the Ice Age, sleep wasn't just about catching some downtime. It was an incredibly high-stakes event. It was strictly about survival. Making the wrong choice about your shelter or your bedding didn't just mean waking up with a stiff neck. It could literally mean freezing to death overnight. The contrast between our modern comforts and their nightly reality is just massive. And the threat from the elements was absolute. When winter hit, much of Europe would just plunge to -10, -20 degrees Celsius. And during sudden freezes, it would drop even lower than that. Just try to imagine laying down on the ground in those temperatures. That meant early humans couldn't afford to just react to the cold when it happened. They had to think like elite full-time survivalists every single day of the year just to prepare for it.
That brings us to Section 1, summer, or what we can really call the seasons of preparation.
So here's a crazy thought. Surviving the winter actually began the moment the snow started to melt. And even in these so-called warm summer months, average temperatures hovered right around a pretty chilly 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Summer definitely wasn't a season for kicking back and relaxing. It was an intense, frantic season of life-saving preparation. People meticulously gathered and stockpiled firewood, carefully protecting it from the dampness because, frankly, without a steady fire, staying alive was basically impossible. Then there was the food. Hunters went after massive game, mammoths, reindeer, bison, but they couldn't eat all that meat at once, right? So they preserved it. They dried it in the sun, smoked it, or just left it out to freeze in the open air. The icy landscape was essentially a giant natural walk-in refrigerator. And we absolutely cannot forget about animal fat. Fat was like gold. It provided light for the dark hours, it provided insulation, and it packed those absolutely crucial calories, the literal fuel that kept the human body burning warm from the inside out while they slept. What's truly fascinating here is how the harsh reality of survival completely bound the group together. Everyone, and I mean everyone, played a critical role. You had the hunters going out to secure the heavy, calorie-dense food and the thick hides. You had the gatherers systematically collecting essential plants and firewood. The elders were basically the VIPs of the group. They passed down generation after generation of knowledge about exactly when and how to prepare for the deep freezes. Even the children pitched in. They learned the ropes by drying meat or helping to layer the bedding. Every single summer harvest, every animal hide, every piece of wood was a collective investment for those brutal, freezing nights that were right around the corner. Okay, let's move on to Section 2, the first sleeping bags. This is all about how they layered up to stay alive. So the firewood is totally dry, the meat is frozen solid. But how did they physically prepare the icy ground for sleep? Well, building a bed wasn't just throwing down a blanket. It was a highly structured, life-saving process. First off, families would put down a thick base layer of grasses, pine needles, and moss right onto the dirt. And archaeologists have actually found the physical evidence of this beneath ancient sleeping areas. This base layer was absolutely vital to insulate their bodies and stop the frozen earth from just sucking the heat right out of them. Next up was step 2. Laying down animal hides to act as a barrier against that ascending cold. And finally, step 3 involved wrapping themselves up tightly in thick, heavy furs to trap their own body heat. This multi-layered system was basically the world's very first prototype of a high-tech sleeping bag. But wait, here's a massive critical detail. You couldn't just build this cozy little bed once and use it all winter. Nope. Archaeologists point out that these primitive sleeping bags required constant maintenance. They had to be continually rotated, thoroughly dried out, and replaced because moisture from human sweat and the environment would inevitably build up. And sleeping on damp furs in sub-zero temperatures wasn't just, slightly uncomfortable, it was a literal death sentence. That trapped moisture would pull heat away from the body incredibly fast. And of course, the insulation didn't just stop at the bedding. Their clothing was crafted with that exact same meticulous life-or-death care. Our ancestors used tiny, precise needles carved out of bone to stitch together animal hides and furs. They were making heavy coats, leggings, and even boots that were actively lined with dry grass for an extra layer of insulation.
All of this gear had to be painstakingly crafted during the slightly warmer months, because once that winter storm hit, there was absolutely zero margin for error. Which brings us to Section 3, rethinking how humans slept. Let's look at how their rest was totally different from ours. This intensely brutal environment completely shatters our modern assumptions about what a good night's sleep actually looks like. Obviously, we don't have written sleep diaries from the Ice Age, but studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies give us some pretty incredible clues. Today, we fully expect to just lay down and sleep in one solid, uninterrupted 8-hour block, right? But back then, sleep had to be highly flexible and totally fragmented. People would experience multiple wakeful periods throughout the night. They had to wake up to tend the fire pits, which were non-negotiable for heat, light, and keeping predators away. They'd wake up to care for crying children. And interestingly, the elders, who naturally tend to require a bit less sleep, often stepped up to act as night watchers. It created this brilliant, built-in active security system for the entire group. We also have to keep in mind the extreme seasonal changes in daylight. In some of these regions, during the dead of winter, humans were facing 14 to 16 hours of absolute pitch-black darkness. I mean, that is a massive chunk of your day. Because of that prolonged darkness, it's highly likely that people rested significantly longer, or at least spent way more time inactive, just huddled in their shelters, compared to the summer months when the sun stayed up late and everyone was rushing to gather resources. Now, this extreme winter downtime actually leads us to a really wild, though heavily debated, scientific theory. What if Ice Age humans actually slowed down their metabolisms and entered a sort of hibernation-like state to survive the worst of the winter? I know it sounds crazy, but some scientists point to very intriguing fossil evidence showing seasonal interruptions in bone growth, which looks remarkably similar to what we see in animals that hibernate today. Now, to be clear, it's still a very bold and debated idea in the scientific community, but just the sheer possibility of it highlights exactly how extreme their biological adaptation to the cold might have actually been. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 4, a legacy of survival. When we step back and look at everything, from the meticulously moss-lined bedding to the fragmented shift-work sleep schedules, the bigger picture becomes crystal clear. Sleep for Ice Age humans wasn't just biological downtime, it was a highly strategic survival tool. They didn't merely survive the freezing elements, they quite literally outsmarted them. Sleeping closely huddled together meant sharing life-saving body heat. Constantly maintaining those fires kept the terrifying Ice Age predators at a safe distance. Their flexible, fragmented schedules ensured someone was always awake and alert. It was precisely this intense, calculated adaptability that allowed humanity to outlast the deep freeze and successfully spread across the entire globe. Which leaves us with a pretty incredible thought to ponder. The next time you curl up under a nice heavy blanket in your warm, comfortable room, take a second to think about them. Think about our ancestors, surviving by sleeping on the frozen, fur-covered ground, huddled tightly around a fire, waking up in shifts to keep the flames alive against howling -20-degree winds. Their incredible endurance, their grit, and those very sleep strategies fundamentally shaped who we are today. It proves that human beings can adapt and endure in literally the harshest climates imaginable.